Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a really special one lined up for you today.
I think so too.
Usually we are sifting through, a whole stack of articles, maybe a few book summaries, trying to piece together a pretty broad topic.
Yeah, casting a wide net.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today we are doing something very different, very precise. We are zooming all the way in on a single document. It's a source that's simply titled Texto Colado.
Which just means pasted text.
Right, pasted text. It sounds incredibly unassuming, doesn't it?
It really does. Like something you might find, scribbled in a margin somewhere or forgotten on a clipboard. But when you actually read it, it is, wow, it's electric.
Completely electric. And the mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this specific text, almost line by line. Because on the surface, it looks like a historical account. It's clearly talking about a pre-Reformation religious context, almost certainly the church. But when you start to peel back the layers, it reads like a forensic autopsy of a massive institution failing in real time.
That is exactly how I see it. It is a case study. I mean, if you put on let's say, your systems theory glasses, this isn't just about monks and bishops. No. It's a blueprint. It shows us how institutions rise, how they can rot from the inside out when they lose their way, and then how they are eventually forced to change whether they want to or not.
And that brings us right to the hook for today's discussion, I think. The central tension that this source material presents is this paradox of power.
The paradox of power, yeah.
The text argues that power reshapes institutions, it builds them up, but then that very same power creates the structural stress that eventually breaks them.
It's like the bigger the building gets, the more likely the foundation is to crack.
That's a perfect way to put it. It creates this inherent vulnerability.
It does. And the text, it traces this incredible arc from the seduction of wealth to the decline of integrity, then to the silencing of critics, and finally to the technological shock that brings the whole house of cards down.
And the technological catalyst. That's the part I'm most excited to get to, the printing press.
Oh, absolutely.
But the way the text treats it is so interesting. It's not just a machine that prints books.
No, it's presented as an information weapon.
Yes.
It frames it as the mechanism that just completely broke the monopoly on truth. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. So let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into the text. It opens with this very heavy, very deliberate concept. It says, power had reshaped the church. But then it follows immediately with a pivot. But power also exposed its weaknesses. Let's unpack that first. What is the text actually telling us here about the relationship between, say, success and integrity?
Well, it's setting up a correlation right from the start. And unfortunately, it's a negative one. The text is positing that as the institution's worldly success metrics went up.
So we're talking land, gold, political influence.
Exactly. The ability to shape kings and kingdoms. As all of that increased, its internal integrity metrics went down.
Just the classic gaining the world but losing your soul dynamic.
Precisely. It is a textbook case of goal displacement. The institution stops optimizing for its original mission, which was, spiritual guidance and care for the poor.
And instead starts optimizing for what?
Its own perpetuation, its own luxury, its own expansion. Yeah. The health of the organization becomes the goal, not the purpose the organization was founded for.
And the text doesn't just leave that as some vague theory. It gets right into the mechanics of how this actually happened. No. And this brings us to the first major section of our analysis, the commodification of faith.
Right.
The text has this devastating summary statement. It just says, faith became a transaction.
And that one word, transaction, it just does so much heavy lifting in that sense.
It really does. It implies a swap.
Yeah.
I give you cash, you give me some kind of spiritual goods. And the text explicitly mentions two mechanisms that drove this. Offices were bought and indulgences were sold.
The two pillars of the new business model.
Exactly. I want to deep dive into offices were bought first. Historically, we know this practice is simony, but in the context of this text, what does that actually do to an organization from the inside?
Well, just think about the incentives. It changes everything. In an ideal version of this institution, let's call it a meritocracy of piety, you would expect leaders to be chosen based on their wisdom, their holiness, their ability to guide the flock. The qualification for the job is the content of your character.
Right. You want the person who cares the most to be in charge, the most devout person.
Exactly. But the text says offices were bought. This means the primary qualification for leadership shifted from piety to capital.
So it's not about how holy you are, it's about how wealthy you are.
Precisely. If you have enough gold, you can be a bishop, you can be a cardinal. It completely changes the entire profile of the leadership class.
It transforms them from shepherds into, what, investors?
That is the perfect analogy. Seriously, if I pay, say, 10,000 gold florins to secure a high-ranking office, I am not looking at that position as a burden of service.
No, you're looking at your balance sheet.
I am looking at it as an asset. I have made a significant financial investment, and now I need a return on investment. I need to earn that money back, and then some.
So the leadership itself becomes extractive. They aren't there to give, they're there to take.
They become venture capitalists in robes, and that mindset, it naturally trickles down. If the guy at the top bought his job, he is going to expect the guys below him to generate revenue.
Of course.
And that leads us directly to the second mechanism the text identifies. Indulgences were sold.
This is the revenue stream. For any listener who might know the term but not the mechanics, this is essentially selling forgiveness, right? Is that a fair summary?
In the context of this source, yes, absolutely. It is the monetization of anxiety.
Wow. The monetization of anxiety.
Think about it. You have a population that is deeply religious. They are terrified of the afterlife, and they're deeply worried about the souls of their deceased relatives in purgatory.
And the institution steps in and says,
We have the solution. We have a treasury, a surplus of grace from the saints, and for a small fee, we can transfer some of that credit to your account or your dead grandmother's account.
it's cynical. It's just incredibly cynical when you lay it out like that.
It is the ultimate expression of faith as a transaction. But think for a second about the deeper psychological impact the text is hinting at here. If salvation is for sale, what does that imply about the nature of God?
It implies that God prefers the rich, that justice is not blind.
Exactly. If you are a poor peasant and you cannot afford the indulgence for your mother, you aren't just poor in a worldly sense anymore. You are now spiritually disadvantaged.
You're second class in the eyes of the church.
And by extension, in the eyes of God. It creates a tiered system of salvation. Gold tier gets you to heaven fast. The basic tier, well, you're stuck in purgatory, maybe forever.
And that just rots the core of the institution. The text says integrity declined. I mean, how could it not? You can't run a scam like that without completely hollowing out your own moral authority.
You can't. You've turned the temple into a marketplace.
Yes.
And eventually, the customers, the believers, they start to notice. You can only sustain that kind of dissonance for so long before it becomes glaringly visible.
Which brings us perfectly to the next section of the text, the great disconnect. The text moves from the mechanics of money to the visuals of wealth. It paints this incredibly stark picture. It says, many clergy lived in luxury while the poor searched for hope.
The visual contrast there is so intentional and so powerful. It just frames the entire scene. On one side, you have opulent silks, gold, grand palaces.
And on the other side,
despair, people in rags, hungry, looking for some kind of meaning in their suffering.
it's hard to ignore that kind of gap. I mean, it's one thing to hear rumors about corruption. It's another thing entirely to see your spiritual leader eating a 10-course feast while your children are starving.
It creates an emotional volatility. Sociologically speaking, humans can actually tolerate a fair bit of inequality. We sort of accept that kings live differently than peasants.
Right. There's an expected order to things.
But we tolerate it usually under the assumption that the system is fair in some cosmic way, or that the leaders are bearing a heavy burden for the common good. You know, the heavy is the head that wears the crown idea.
All right, the whole concept of noblesse oblige. With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. But when the inequality is this glaring, and it's being perpetrated by the very people who claim to hold the moral high ground, the people who preach, "Blessed are the poor," it becomes unbearable.
It feels like a betrayal.
A profound betrayal. The hypocrisy is just too much to stomach.
The text has this phrase that I think is just brilliant. It says, the message of the gospel grew distant. No, I don't think this means the gospel physically moved away. The Bible was still there. The churches were still there.
No, it's not a physical distance. It's a relational distance. It's about relevance.
The relational distance. I like that.
If I am a peasant struggling just to survive, and I look up at the pulpit and I see a man in gold robes who I know bought his position, the message he is preaching just feels remote. It feels like it belongs to a completely different world. It has no connection to my reality.
It's like when you say you've grown distant from a friend. You might be in the same room, but there is no real connection. There's a chasm between you.
That's it exactly. And the text says the poor searched for hope. That implies they weren't finding it where they were supposed to.
In the church.
Right. That's a crucial insight. If they were searching for it, it means the institution that was literally built to provide hope had stopped delivering the product.
It had stopped serving its primary function.
It was consuming resources, taking the widow's last mite for the new cathedral, but it wasn't giving back the spiritual comfort and community that it promised.
It's the tragedy of an institution that has lost its purpose. It exists, supposedly, to serve the poor, but it ends up becoming an entity that ignores them in favor of its own luxury.
It's almost like the institution became a biological organism that just wanted to feed itself, to grow bigger.
That's a great way to think about it.
It's a classic characteristic of institutional decay. The survival and the comfort of the bureaucracy become more important than the mission the bureaucracy was created to serve. The means become the ends.
So you have this powder keg, you have this systemic corruption at the top, real suffering at the bottom, and a complete disconnect in the middle. The text then says, yet resistance rose.
The inevitable reaction.
And here's where we get into the third section of our deep dive, the rise of resistance. Who were these resistors?
The text identifies them very clearly. Monks, scholars, and preachers.
So let's be clear, these weren't outsiders. This wasn't an invading army or a group of atheists trying to tear it all down.
No, and that is the critical distinction the text makes, and it's so important. These were insiders.
The ultimate insiders.
They were the immune system of the organization itself. They were the true believers. They were the ones who had actually read the manual, the scriptures, and realized that the current management was going completely off script.
That phrase from the outline, calling the church back to its roots, is key here. They weren't trying to invent something new. They were trying to rewind the clock.
It's a conservative revolution in the literal sense of that phrase. They wanted to conserve the original meaning.
Right.
They're holding up the original blueprint and saying, look at this, and now look at us. We have lost our way.
The text says, some demanded reform from within. Others spoke against corruption openly. So it seems like there was a spectrum of resistance.
There always is in these situations. You have the diplomats, the people who think they can fix the system by, writing polite letters to the bishop and working through the proper channels. And then when that inevitably fails, you get the firebrands, the ones who go out to the town square and start shouting about it. But the motivation at its core is the same. They loved the institution enough to criticize it.
But the institution didn't see it that way, did it? The leadership didn't interpret it as tough love.
No, not at all. And this is where we get into the psychological reaction of entrenched power. The text is chillingly clear. It says, their voices were not welcomed, warnings were ignored, critics were silenced.
Critics were silenced. That sounds ominous.
It implies coercion. It implies force. We are talking about excommunication, imprisonment, heresy trials, silencing in the most literal sense. The institution decided that the problem wasn't the corruption.
The problem was the people pointing out the corruption.
Precisely. Shoot the messenger.
Why do they do that? I mean, logically, if someone tells you your house is on fire, you don't shoot the messenger, you go put out the fire. Why do powerful institutions almost always try to silence the critic first?
I think it's what some psychologists call the ostrich effect. If I bury my head in the sand, the problem doesn't exist.
So denial.
Deep denial. But it is also about the protection of sunk costs. By this point, the entire economic model of the church relied on that transaction we talked about. The luxury, the palaces, the political bribes, it was all funded by the sale of indulgences and offices.
So to admit the critic is right is to admit the entire business model is illegitimate.
Exactly. It would require them to bankrupt themselves, both financially and morally. It requires a level of humility that, as we've already established, this particular leadership class did not possess.
So they see it as an attack.
They viewed criticism as treason. They truly believed that if they could just cut out the tongue of the critic, the criticism itself would disappear.
They thought they could kill the idea by killing the messenger.
Yeah.
But the text pivots here with this beautiful, almost philosophical line. But truth has a way of returning.
That is the turning point of the entire narrative. It's such a powerful statement. You can suppress the truth, you can burn the books, you can lock up the monks, but the structural contradictions, they remain. The rot is still there.
Right. You haven't fixed the problem.
You've only hidden it, and eventually something happens that breaks the dam.
And in this text, that something isn't a person, it's a technology. And now we're entering section 4, the turning point. The text says, the printing press spread ideas faster than sermons.
This is the game changer. This is the moment the timeline splits. Up until this point, information was slow, it was expensive, and most importantly, it was controlled.
Centrally controlled.
Absolutely. If you wanted to hear the word of God, you had to go to a church. The priest controlled the message, the interpretation, the delivery.
It was monopoly on information.
A total monopoly. And monopolies are great for the monopolist until a disruptive technology comes along that drops the cost of entry to basically zero.
Yeah.
The printing press didn't just print books, it lowered the cost of dissent.
The text focuses so much on speed. It says it spread ideas faster than sermons.
And we have to think about the physics of it. A sermon happens in one place at one time to a specific, limited group of people, and then it evaporates into the air.
It's ephemeral.
Exactly. But a printed pamphlet, a tract, it travels, it can be hidden in a sack of grain, it can be passed from hand to hand in a tavern, it can be copied, it goes viral in the 15th century sense of the word.
I love that comparison.
Mm-hmm.
It really is the original viral content. And it wasn't just any content. The text is specific. It says, Scripture reached common people.
This is the democratization of knowledge. Remember, before this, the foundational texts were largely locked away in Latin, a language accessible only to the highly educated clergy.
So the common person had to take the clergy's word for it.
Yeah.
They had to trust the filter.
They had no choice.
Yeah.
But now the text is in their hands, often translated into their own language.
No, they have the source code.
They have the source code. And when you have the source material in your own hands, you start to notice things. You start to compare what you're reading with what you're seeing in the world around you.
And the text says, questions multiplied. That feels like a direct result of that access.
It is a chain reaction. Access leads to verification. Verification leads to discrepancies.
Wait a minute.
I'm reading this and I don't see anything in here about paying 10 gold coins to get grandma out of purgatory. And those discrepancies, they lead to questions.
Authority was challenged. Tradition was tested. The text really emphasizes that the technology enabled the challenge.
And notice that specific phrase, tradition was tested. Tradition relies on continuity and, frankly, on unquestioned acceptance.
We do it this way because we've always done it this way.
Exactly. But when you contest that tradition against a standard, against the scripture, in this case, the cracks become visible to everyone. The authority can no longer just say, because I said so.
That doesn't work anymore.
It loses all its power.
It's like the curtain being pulled back in Oz. Once you see the man behind the curtain, you can't unsee him. The mystique is gone.
It's gone forever. And that leads us directly to the final section of the text, the inevitable conclusion. The text says, the church stood at a crossroads.
The crossroads. That implies a choice, a binary choice.
Yes, the status quo is no longer an option. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't go back to the way things were before the printing press. You can't go back to the silence.
No, the choice is what?
The choice is, do you double down on repression, try to violently stamp this out, which will likely fail and lead to war, or do you reform?
And the text has a very definitive conclusion on this. It says reform was no longer optional. It was inevitable. I just love the weight of that word, inevitable.
It suggests that the forces that had been unleashed, that combination of deep systemic corruption and the explosive spread of truth via technology, it created a momentum that could not be stopped by any human agency.
Not even the leadership of the institution itself.
No. Even if the Pope himself had wanted to stop the change at that point, he couldn't have. The system had tipped, the phase change had begun.
It's interesting to think about this in terms of pressure. The corruption built up the pressure inside the boiler for decades. The resistance was the steam trying to find a crack to escape. The silencing of critics was the leadership foolishly welding the safety valves shut.
Right. A terrible idea.
And then the printing press came along and just turned up the heat under the boiler to maximum.
And when you weld the safety valves shut and you turn up the heat, you don't get stability, you get an explosion. That inevitable reform the text talks about, that was the explosion.
The Reformation.
It was chaotic, it was messy, it was bloody, but it was the only way the pressure could finally equalize.
So if we look at the whole journey of this text, this incredible arc, we start with the seduction of power and wealth.
Right.
That leads to the corruption of the mission faith, becomes a simple transaction. That corruption then leads to a deep disconnect from the very people the institution is supposed to serve.
The people and the internal critics.
Right. They try to speak up, but they are silenced. But then technology enters the chat. The printing press accelerates the truth.
And the people get the knowledge.
And finally, reform becomes the only path forward. It's not a choice anymore.
It's a perfect arc. It's a tragedy, in a way, of lost potential, but it's also a deeply hopeful story about the resilience of truth.
How so?
It shows that systems can be self-correcting, even if that correction is painful and chaotic. Truth finds a way out.
It really makes you think about the fragility of authority. It feels so solid, so permanent when you're looking at the big buildings and the luxury and the power. But if the foundation is rotten, all it takes is a little pamphlet to bring the whole thing down.
That's the core lesson of the text. Authority isn't built on gold or stone, it's built on trust. And when you sell that trust for gold, when you make faith a transaction, you are essentially selling the foundation of your own house. Eventually, it collapses.
Truth has a way of returning. That line is really going to stick with me. It feels very, very relevant today.
It is timeless. It applies to the church in this text, but you could apply that exact same lens to corporations, to governments, to any large entrenched system you can think of.
So let's try to bring this all home for the listener. Why should you care about a pasted text about some old corruption? What is the relevance for us right here, right now?
Because we all live in systems. We rely on institutions for everything, our food, our information, our governance, and we need to be able to spot the signs of decay.
To be able to see when the mission is drifting.
Exactly. We need to recognize when a mission is drifting into a transaction. And most importantly, we need to understand the role of information and technology in that dynamic.
Because just like the printing press, we have our own technologies today that are disrupting monopolies on truth.
We are living through an almost identical technological shift. The text identifies the printing press as the accelerator, the thing that broke the information monopoly. Now look around us.
We're drowning in information.
Drowning in it. The gatekeepers are gone, for better or for worse.
We have the internet. We have social media, decentralized finance, AI is coming online. Yeah. It feels like we are in that exact phase from the text where questions are multiplying.
We are absolutely in that moment. It's a moment where authority is being challenged on a global scale. Just like the common people got their hands on scripture and started asking, hey, why are we doing it this way?
Right.
People today are getting their hands on raw data, on scientific papers, on leaked documents, on open source code, and they are asking the exact same question of our modern institutions.
And just like the church in the text, our modern institutions are standing at their own crossroads. They can try to silence the critics, and we see them trying to do that, or they can reform.
And if this text is any guide, reform is, in the long run, inevitable. The only question is whether it happens voluntarily and smoothly, or involuntarily and painfully.
That is the big question, isn't it?
It is. And for you, the listener, I think the challenge is to figure out where you stand in this dynamic. Are you the ostrich with your head in the sand? Are you the cynic just buying the indulgence because it's easier? Or are you the scholar trying to call the system back to its roots?
It calls for active participation. That's what it comes down to. You can't just sit on the sidelines and watch the system rot. You have to engage with it.
You have to look for the roots, as the text says. Check the source code. Don't just take the authority's word for it. Read the document for yourself.
Which is exactly what we try to do today with Textocolato. It's truly amazing how much wisdom was packed into those few paragraphs.
Always look for the pattern beneath the prose. The history changes, the clothes change, the technology changes. But human nature, the dynamics of power, those stay the same.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over. We talked a lot about the printing press being the catalyst for truth returning in this text. It forced the institution to face its crossroads.
Right. It was the great accelerator.
So here's the question for you. If the printing press was the catalyst then, what are the modern equivalents that are forcing our institutions to face their own crossroads today? Is it the algorithm? Is it the blockchain? Is it AI? What is the tool that is making reform inevitable right now?
That is the million-dollar question. What is currently spreading ideas faster than our modern sermons? If you can identify that, you can see the future.
Exactly. Something to think about as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Textocolato. It's just amazing what you can find in a few lines of text.
It was a pleasure. Always keep analyzing the systems around you.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Keep asking questions.
And keep searching for the truth.